gets himself into the space program.
I think his dad was well connected.
Well, his dad was, in some ways, well connected. He was an engineer of some kind, maybe in the space program or connected to the rocket programs.
I think he actually designed military aircraft and built them.
I can't remember exactly, but
there is a jet that's named after him, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the point is, according to the story, he either gets in the beginning of the cosmonaut program, or he gets in late and, manages to go through a crash course, no pun intended, of what it takes to be a cosmonaut, and turns out to be the most qualified guy to do the job. Better than Yuri Gagarin. Or Gagarin, excuse me, mispronounced his name. According to the theory, what then happens is Vladimir gets into the Vostok space capsule on the 7th of April, 1961. So it was 5 days before Gagarin, like we were just talking about before. And he's shot into space. And, okay, well, if that happened, then why don't we know about Vladimir and who cares about Yuri? Well, that's because something reportedly went wrong with his space capsule, and Mission Control decided that they had to bring him to Earth early. The thing to understand is that in the Soviet program, Mission Control on Earth controlled everything in terms of navigation. The cosmonaut wasn't in control of that. He was along for the ride.
They probably didn't want the cosmonaut firing his retros early and landing in the U.S. instead of Siberia.
Not. Hell of a defection.
Yeah, by bringing him down early, then he didn't even complete a single orbit, correct?
No. According to this story, he made several orbits, and they brought him home to Earth on the third orbit. But because they had to bring him down early because something went wrong, I guess he was supposed to do 5 orbits according to this story, they had to bring him down, and he landed in China, where he then stayed for a year as an honored guest of the Chinese government, before then coming home to Mother Russia and kind of just disappearing into the background.
I wonder, as an honored guest, what they did. Did they waterboard him? Or
Yeah. If anybody's ever heard the term honored guest, it's not actually being an honored guest.
Yeah.
It's a spy.
Okay.
You sound confused.
Yeah, I guess I'm just confused about why his name wouldn't have been the one we all know then.
We're going to
because they covered it up.
Okay. So we're going to talk about in just a minute, actually.
Okay.
How some of the censorship worked and the way that the Soviet government went about censoring things. And that's going to kind of help us understand what happened to Vladimir.
Okay.
I know it's a little weird.
All right.
And this whole thing, the story is very, very difficult unless you keep in mind, and I'll just preface it a little bit, that the Soviets operated on a system of only talking about your successes. If something could be possibly embarrassing or it didn't go according to plan, it didn't happen.
Got swept under the rug, There were cosmonauts. There was one cosmonaut who was cashiered from the program, and he was airbrushed from the photographs of the cosmonauts. They did a lot of airbrushing.
Yeah, we're going to talk about him. So yeah.
Okay, so I'll just trust you. We're getting there.
We're going to come back to it. So as anybody that knows space history knows, the 21st of July, 1969 is when the Americans landed on the moon and beat the Soviets to that destination.
USA.
Right on.
CCCP. No. Okay. Well, according to the Lost Cosmonauts theory, the Soviets didn't go down without a fight, and they threw a lot of men at the problem to try and get there first, and killed several of them.
Yeah,
Sounds kind of like the Russians.
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah,
it's like, we can't do this, we'll just throw a bunch of people at it.
That's kind of true. And they actually did have a couple of accidents in 67 and 69.
Yes, they did. Well, according to this, in the summer of 69, there was an attempted launch of a manned mission. That, of course, failed, kills everybody on board.
You said the summer of 69. I was just singing the song. Trying to distract myself a little bit from the things you're saying. Sorry.
Okay. It appears that launch wasn't the only one that the USSR was trying to put up. They made one blunder after another and made being a cosmonaut one of their most dangerous occupations, which it kind of evidently was because they had about a 50% success rating with some of their rockets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course, a lot of our rockets blew up too. So it was
They did, but I think that we had a lot of unmanned rockets that blew up more often than not.
Yeah.
And we went through extensive safety testing, and I know that the Soviets were doing that, but I don't know how much of that is reflected in our lore that we're going through.
Well, most of it was dogs.
They used a lot of animals. That is very true.
Mostly dogs. We used monkeys in our Gemini program.
We did.
There's I don't know if you've read The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, there's a kind of an amusing scene in there. They opened up the capsule. They thought the monkey was going to be in hysterics. Instead, the monkey's just sitting back, strapped to his chair with his arms crossed across his chest, and just looking bored.
Like has no idea what. Yeah.
And then one of the
Why did it take so long?
Yeah, somebody hands him an apple, and the monkey just without even kind of looking, he just reaches out with one hand and takes the apple and starts eating it. Looks kind of bored.
That's awesome.
That's a pretty funny book. You should read it if you haven't.
Okay, well, let's go.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry for the aside there.
That was a great aside.
It was a cute aside.
It was. We have a lore here or a story here that says in 1968, the Soyuz 2, which was supposed to be an unmanned test mission, actually was a manned mission, and the occupant of that capsule was Ivan Stochnikov and his dog Kloka.
So it was a manned and dog mission then.
Yeah, totally. And it's believed that they didn't come back and were scrubbed out of history because they were hit by a passing meteorite and thrown off course.
Oh.
Yeah.
Rough, tough one.
And yet one more attempt to get to the moon before the Americans. We have the launch of Andrei Mikoyan and another cosmonaut. They were supposed to go to the moon, but instead they shot past their destination, which was the moon, and drifted off into space. Okay. And I really, really, really want to know if at least somebody was humming back to the USSR. That's the only thing I can think about.
How do you manage to miss the moon?
It's really big.
Yeah, was the intent of that mission, to actually land on the moon or just orbit the moon a few times and come back?
I don't know. I have no idea. Overall, if we follow the lore, anywhere between 11 to dozens of people were killed in the attempt to A, get into space, and then B, to get to the moon by the Soviet Union and their government in their space program.
Well, entirely possible. I mean, because and not just cosmonauts getting killed, other people are getting killed in accidents.
There's a bunch of people get killed in accidents.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
The reason that that people really kind of believe this entire theory is, as we talked about earlier, is all of the cover-ups and the censorship that went on.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly brought a lot of this on themselves. Even though they angrily denied all these stories, they except for the ones that really demonstrably happened in 67 and 69. Yeah, they kind of brought it on themselves.
Well, they did, and people who lived through the Cold War era just expected that from the Soviet Union. Here's a funny story. I went over and saw my grandmother today, and I was talking to her, and she asked me what what the show was going to be, and so I was talking to her about it, and I'm telling her. She goes, "Oh no, I can totally see the Soviets doing that. I grew up in that time. I lived through that, but that's just what I expect them to do." And I see, and that just gave me a totally different perspective of why this is such a popular, entrenched thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because to me, it seems silly, but I'm of a different generation.
Yeah, we run into that a lot.
It does.
We run into that, with when we talked about UBB 76, you run into that a lot because it's popular to say, the Russians are doing all sorts of stuff we have no idea, because, they are our nemesis.
That's right.
As Americans, we're just told that those are the bad guys over there. And whether that's true or not is, who knows, but that's what we're told, and it's very easy to just say, I don't know, it sounds like something they might do. It's nefarious, so probably. Even though, I don't know that that's necessarily true. At least to the extent that we
expect it to be true.
Yeah.
Let's go through. I think I've got 3 different cases here of things that were censored and scrubbed from the books.
Okay.
Prove
Proven.
things.
Proven.
Proven to be
With
airbrush.
the fall of the Soviet Union, and these documents came out, I think, like in '89 or so is when documents people started really pulling some of this stuff out and finding out what happened. But the first one we're going to talk about is what is referred to as the Nedelin catastrophe. This happened on the 24th of October, 1960. The Soviet Union had an ICBM that was being prepped for a test flight, which is an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's a big missile, goes from country to country with
carrying some nuclear warheads.
payload
Yeah.
is the intention. But this thing used the worst fuel ever.
That's a cool name, though.
It does. It's Devil's Venom. Devil's Venom is really nasty stuff. It's made of hydrazine and nitric acid, which
Ugh.
is obscenely corrosive.
Yeah.
Really great for causing lift and burn, but unfortunately the side effect is that when it burns, it makes an amazingly toxic gas that just instant killer. I mean, there's no getting around. You don't hang around this stuff when it's burning.
I
Yeah.
guess that seems fairly counterintuitive. Like, okay, we're going to bomb these people over here. We're going to ruin their lives.
And also send
We're
out a
gonna
cloud
kill
of
them.
poison gas. That's good.
But at the same time, we're going to kill ourselves with the
this
poisonous
poison
gas.
gas.
All you got to do is hold your breath. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably true they were all wearing gas masks.
You
like,
really don't stand
24/7
next to the
anyway,
launching
so-
rocket. You're
I'm
probably
sure they
okay.
were probably in buildings nearby, or supposed to be in buildings.
Supposed to be.
Yeah.
Supposed to be is exactly right, because here's what happens. There is a guy by the name of Mitrofan Nedelin. He's the one who the whole thing was named after. And he wanted this rocket to launch before the 7th of November of that year, which was the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. Why it was so important to him, I don't know. But problem is that because he pushed the schedule, a bunch of safety testing didn't get done.
It's always the
Yeah.
safety testing, isn't
It
it?
is. So
it's
this-
never like the rocket just didn't get painted. Like,
Yeah.
it's always the safety testing.
We forgot to put the numbers on it. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
no, it's always the big major safety test. And that was a problem, is that they were doing a test on something else. They hadn't done all their tests, and the igniter
The second stage.
in the second stage goes off, which then lights the first stage
Yeah.
of the rocket while
Bad
it's all
timing.
sitting on the ground.
No, you don't really want that. That's not what you like in a rocket.
No, and if you don't know how rocket stages work, they're basically stacked on top of each other. They're little jet engines that when one burns out, the next kicks on. Both of them kicking on at the same time, not the intended plan.
No.
A very bad thing.
No, I mean, see, the second stage, of course, is sitting on top of the first stage.
Yes.
And so when it lights off, the first stage is not supposed to be there anymore.
No.
Yeah. And it's sitting there, it's all full of fuel. So,
Yeah, so it's a big explosion. It was a massive explosion. Depending on the sources that you read, anywhere from a specific number of 71 to a round number of over 200 people were killed. And sadly, the people that were right next to the rocket died right away because of the explosion.
Well, maybe not sadly. Maybe
Lucky for them
Yeah.
in the way that they died.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
got-
were right
got a
there. They
quicker
were
end.
incinerated instantly. The poor guys who were farther distance away when the rocket went off and ran evidently couldn't get out of the complex that it was in. The fences were shut,
Yeah.
and they died because of the gas, which is a terrible way to go.
Uh-huh.
But this whole thing was swept under the rug, and officially, according to the records, Nedelin died in a plane crash.
Yeah. And,
I mean, people tried to pick up this story, and they talked about the catastrophe several times over decades, but it wasn't until all of the records came out after the fall of the Union that we found out what really happened.
that's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's so that's why we don't necessarily take them at their word for a lot of stuff.
Yep. We have another one, and this is actually a space program specific story. This is of a cosmonaut by the name of Valentin Bondarenko. Valentin was selected to be in the cosmonaut program in 1961. He'd never make it into space, though, because on the 23rd of March, 1961, he was taking part in an endurance test. It was a high altitude thing, so they had him in a pressure chamber, and he was going to be in there, I think, for a total of 15 days. The atmosphere was 50% plus oxygen. He's doing his daily work. He's got monitors on him, little sticky things. He finishes his job for the day. He takes off the monitors, but they leave that goo, so he uses a cotton swab and alcohol to wipe the goo off. But he's not very careful in what he's doing. Instead of throwing that cotton swab in the trash, it hits a hot plate that he was using to make tea.
Oh,
And
seems like a bad idea to have a hot plate inside a 50% oxygen atmosphere.
I do not disagree with you on this. The cotton swab goes up in flames. Because there's so much oxygen in that environment, basically everything burns. It takes half an hour to get the chamber open. By the time they get it open, he's got third-degree burns over almost his entire body. The only part of him that wasn't burned was his feet, and that's because he's wearing boots. He dies 16 hours later.
I'm kind of amazed that he wasn't already asphyxiated by the time he got him out.
That is, I was amazed that he lived as long as he did. I don't know how that happened, but that failure was scrubbed from the books. And as you talked about before, airbrushing of photos, Joe, he was airbrushed out. There are photos, and you can actually see the before and after, where he's with 6 or 7 other guys, arms around him, and then the next version, it's a blank wall, and his arm is like, they do good jobs of airbrushing these photos, but he's gone. Completely gone.
Yeah, that's...
I think the one that you were talking about, the other one that was airbrushed out, is our next guy, which is Grigory Nyalyubov, I believe.
Close enough.
Yeah. He, and depending on the version, he and possibly another cosmonaut candidate got drunk and got into a fight with some soldiers and got kicked out of the program.
Yeah. And we're airbrushed.
We're airbrushed out because they were failures, and the shame couldn't be on the space program.
The shame of Mother Russia.
Yes.
Yeah.
And here's something else that I need everybody to understand is that the space program in the United States, NASA, it's not a military organization.
Civilian organization, yeah.
In the Soviet Union, the entire thing was run by the military. So therefore, it had an extra layer of secrecy lumped on top of it from the start before they did anything else.
Well, even we didn't. We were fairly open about our space program, but we didn't tell them about every improvement we made in our gear or our rockets.
No, but we also didn't airbrush people out of photos.
Oh no, hell no.
We didn't censor it to that level.
As far as you know.
You're right. As far as I know, I could be wrong.
Area 51, dude.
So that's the proof, or that's the evidence of why people believe this story so much. But let's now, and I know some people like when I do this and some people hate when I do this, but we're going to start over. We're going to start again at the beginning of the chronology that I gave and talk about some of that. First one we're going to talk about is the 3 individual launches, 1957, 58, and 59, that supposedly killed 3 individuals. Again, that was something that came from a quote-unquote high-ranking Czech military officer. I discount that right off the bat. There's no reliable source. That's the source every time. So I discount that.
I'll talk more about this later.
Yeah. Adding of them to different parts of the story, which is actually the next one, because I told you that in 1959 there was 3 cosmonauts who were supposedly have killed Peter Dolgov, Ivan Kocher, Alexei Grachov. Those 3, well, they actually did die.
They weren't cosmonauts, though, right?
Not cosmonauts. They were involved in a capacity in the space program. They were high altitude jumpers. They parachuted from really high up, and they were testing suits. Yeah. Well, Peter specifically, he died when he jumped out of the balloon or whatever it was. I think they were balloons they were using.
I think it was like balloons and a gondola.
And a gondola. Well, when he jumped out, he hit the gondola and it cracked his visor and he depressurized.
Yeah.
And the other 2 people who were also high altitude jumpers, they just disappear. So it's presumed that they also had some kind of accident in their high altitude jumps, but they are then moved over into the story because these guys they didn't disappear in 1959. It was like a year or two later. So the time frame is wrong. So that but I believe that is where they actually came from. And I will tell you, the fourth person that we talked about in that 59 story, Maria. No idea who Maria is. I don't know where Maria came from.
Maria's probably a fictional character.
There's no source ever. Let's move now to 1960 with Robert Heinlein.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that what those military men told him of they sent a man into space that day might have actually been sort of true. If you know what the Soviets were doing.
Yeah, they were sending up mannequins, right?
They were. They had a dummy who was very lifelike. I've seen the pictures of him, and it's amazing the lengths they went to make it look real. And this dummy's name was Ivan Ivanovich. And Ivan's the one that they stuck in these chambers, and one of the, because they would send him up with animals, they would pressurize the suit, they'd have animals in the suit to see if the pressure held, they'd have tape recorders playing in the suit so that the microphone in the suit was broadcasting the whole time to see if the equipment worked when it went up and came back. Like, this is a huge test. One of the things that they had to test, literally the ejector seat.
Yeah.
Because the way that the Soviet program worked is the capsule comes down, a parachute expands and slows it down, and then our friendly cosmonaut gets out of it and parachutes down on their own.
Yeah, because the capsule was moving so fast, and
that they wouldn't survive the impact.
Yeah.
So that may be what they were testing that these guys saw that they then told Heinlein. Very likely that's what was going on.
Ivan Ivanovich.
Ivan Ivanovich. He's creepy looking. Go to the
like
wiki.
It's like John Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Well, is it Ivan or Yvonne?
However you want to say it, I'm saying Ivan.
I'm Googling it right now.
Okay. The next stop in our timeline. Oh, Devin's looking at the mannequin pictures. He's creepy.
Oh, he's so creepy.
Oh, he's kind of creepy.
The next stop on our timeline dealt with Vladimir and his supposed space flight.
Vladimir Ilyushin?
Yes. If you look at the flight of Yuri Gagarin, you're going to notice something very significant, and that is the number of times that he went around the Earth.
Just once.
Once.
Like a smart person.
Yeah.
According to the lore,
Vlad went 3 times.
and was supposed to go 5,
Yeah.
which is a little strange.
Well,
Do you want to know what else, though? It's a fairly complicated thing to launch a man into space.
Mm-hmm.
And launching 2 within 5 days of one another?
Not easy.
No.
no.
What
No.
are you gonna
I
say?
was just going to say, I guess if you wanted to take that approach, you could say, well, okay, so then the original plan was to have Yuri go around 5 times, but since it failed so catastrophically before, they knew they could do it once, so they sent him up and did it once and brought him back, and everything was fine.
Okay.
Right?
That is a train of thought that you can take.
Yes.
But my problem with Vladimir is that it always says that he crashed to Earth in China in his capsule.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't hear
There's
that part.
no
Yeah,
way that he could have survived that impact. Absolutely not.
Well, yeah, but
and the other thing,
but those people can jumble things up. Maybe he crashed in China and he successfully ejected and was captured.
well, but they say that there was something wrong with him and that he was unconscious.
Oh,
That's
really?
why they had to they brought it home early, is that he was having some ill effects.
Maybe he crashed in the ocean.
Well, but no, according to this, he crashed in China.
Right. China owns an ocean.
Well, they do. You're right. They do.
Yeah. Just saying.
Okay.
The official story from the Soviet government is that Vladimir was involved in a very severe car accident and hurt his leg quite severely to the tune of being in the hospital for a year. And then
From a leg injury?
I'm assuming that a car accident, cars didn't have breakaway zones.
Additional. Yeah, okay, got
He
it.
probably crushed both of his legs.
Could be.
And then they had him in the hospital for a year, and then they sent him to China for rehab.
Which makes lots of sense.
It doesn't really.
No.
But what also doesn't make sense is that if he really did crash land in China and he was in his capsule, the Chinese, from a medical perspective, were not all that advanced at that time, and there is no way that they could have treated a man who basically had every bone broken his body from
What do you
crashing
mean
into
they
the
weren't
earth.
advanced? People pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get ancient Chinese secret healers all the time.
Good point.
I don't understand what you mean. No.
I can tell you that actually, it's pretty clear where the Vladimir story came from.
Was it Vladimir? Was he looking for?
No, it wasn't him.
Oh, okay.
It actually was a British communist. There is a paper that was in Britain called the Daily Worker, and evidently what happened is these guys heard that there was going to be a launch, and Vladimir was known to be in the program according to this, and they guessed of A, the date, and B, who was going to be in the rocket. And so on the 11th of April, they put out a paper that said that 5 days prior, Vladimir had gone up and was the first man in space. And then on the 12th, they found out what really happened, and they put out another paper on the 12th that said
Gagarin.
it was Gagarin who was the first man in space. But because they put that paper out, it's been latched onto and used as kind of fodder ever since. All right, we're going to move forward. Now we're going to talk about the Italian brothers.
Yeah.
So, first off, here's one problem with their recordings. Nobody else recorded what they recorded. None of the other listening locations. The Americans were listening. The Brits were listening.
Uh-huh.
Like,
oh, yeah.
the French were
all over
listening.
the place. The French, the Brits, you know.
Somebody else should have picked up what they had. And, okay, well, maybe they got lucky. But they have so many things that I just say that is too many things for them to have actually been lucky to capture.
Well,
and
yeah.
nobody else has.
And there are things like, the heartbeat. The heartbeat was the monitors that they put on astronauts to monitor their lifestyles.
Don't go through the audio channels.
Exactly. It's not like they tape a stethoscope to them and then put a microphone up to the stethoscope.
I don't know.
and
It is
broadcast
Russia.
audio. Yeah, that's a good point.
That might be the way they did it.
Did you ever hear that story about the early space program? It's like the Americans realized that.
Oh, we were talking about the pen.
Oh, you heard the pen story?
I just read that the other
You just
day.
read it? Yeah. So the Americans realized that pens wouldn't work in zero gravity, and so they spent like millions of dollars to develop this special pen that would work in zero G's. And the Russians used a pencil.
Yeah, much smarter.
Well, no, it actually turns out it's not that much smarter because the
It makes
reason.
dust.
Yeah, that graphite dust actually totally screws all of the air filtering systems. So
You have to use a wax pencil.
You really can't
Yeah.
use a graphite pencil, which is what the Soviets were using anyway. But yeah, no, I did just read that, and it's very interesting.
Cute story.
Yeah.
I don't know where
But
were
yeah,
we?
so
But
you
yeah.
don't know. It could
So
have been a stethoscope.
Yeah, maybe,
Microphone.
but most likely it was sent back like telemetry, so
Yeah,
it was converted to.
And any of this audio of breathing
Yeah,
was probably a dog.
exactly. They sent
Because
a lot of dogs up.
they killed a lot of dogs
Yeah,
in
sad.
space. Some of them came back, but most of them didn't.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think any of them came back, but maybe.
Yeah.
No, they all came back.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they all are living on that farm that all of the dogs live
Yeah,
on
exactly.
You're right, Devin.
forever and ever.
Yes. No, I actually do think that some of the dogs came back. I mean, there was that famous one, Laika. Was it Laika or Laika?
Laika.
Laika, yeah.
Yeah, Laika did come back, you're right. The other thing that people have pointed out about their recordings is the language that is used, and that it's wrong.
Like the woman who's in peril and dying. And
The
all that.
grammar is wrong. The way that things are phrased don't match up. Because remember we said that the space program was run by the Soviet military. They have a very specific way that you announce things. There's an order to it. These guys are all trained in that system, and yet none of these recordings match that.
They're
Yeah.
people in peril, close to.
Maybe they didn't. You think there was a lapse in discipline there?
Yeah.
Maybe. But I
Actually-
understand her Russian was not all that good either.
No, the
Yeah.
Russian was really poor,
Yeah.
and it's actually believed that they probably faked it. The transmission of the woman that you were talking about, that we played some of, the grammar is really bad, and evidently these brothers, the Italian brothers, their sister was learning Russian, according to their story, to help them translate. But about that time, she would have had a good enough grasp to speak some of the language, but not a good enough grasp to speak it properly.
I don't know what you want. They didn't have Google Translate.
I know. Seriously, dude.
I'm saying that it's probably a hoax.
There might have been some hoaxery
They
there, yeah.
probably made this stuff up.
Well, the thing about it is, too, is the brothers were clever, they were smart, but obviously they either made some stuff up or were just completely bamboozled by somebody else, who, by the way, knew what frequencies they were listening on. So, like the
Could have
one,
been somebody local.
yeah, the one where they picked up the SOS signal, and then by noting that it had no
Doppler effect.
yeah, no Doppler effect. Then they surmised that it wasn't whizzing by overhead in low Earth orbit, but instead was heading directly away from the Earth. Now, there's a problem with that. If it's heading away from the Earth, if it's achieved escape velocities, it's still moving fast. So you're still going to get a Doppler effect, even if it's moving straight from Earth. But also the Soviets didn't have
Unless
the
it was
capacity.
moving away in a geosynchronous position. I mean, yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah, so I mean, it's and the Soviets didn't have the ability to. They could achieve escape velocity with a very lightweight object, but not with
Not with any kind of capsule.
not with a capsule.
No, they didn't have that ability until 1969 is when that technology came around.
Yeah, and so some of the other ones, like somebody went out of control and just flew out of orbit. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
The wave from the Earth is generated by the rocket that they're riding, and then once that rocket lets go, they're in orbit and slowly drifting back to the planet. They don't have enough velocity to continue to shoot away. They don't have that power at that time.
Yeah.
They don't have the capability to do it.
No, they don't. They don't. I mean, and the idea of there was another thing in here about somebody they lost control and flew out of orbit and
Bounced off the atmosphere.
The other one, you bounce off the atmosphere and into space. Well, it is possible to bounce off the atmosphere, but unless the atmosphere just gives you a massive boost, you're not going to fly up into space. You're just going to go into a different orbit and eventually probably go back into the atmosphere and either burn up or maybe just
Or
make
safely land somewhere.
Make it to ground. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there is a lot of problems with their stuff. Now, there is, to add one feather to their cap, there is I'm using air quotes here, senior engineer who said he was part of the Soviet space program, and in 2001 he confirmed that the brothers' recordings were real.
All of them?
I don't know which ones. It never says which ones specifically, but says that they actually caught stuff that was right.
Who was this guy?
He was a senior engineer.
Ah, one of those guys. Huh?
One of those guys.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And then let's just talk about these the moon landing attempts that were supposed to have happened. Well, there was a rocket test that did explode on a launch pad that does line up with the supposed summer of 1969 loss of somebody in a capsule. Okay, that actually is, except it was an unmanned capsule. The other one that I talked about, which is Ivan Istanovich and his dog Cloca, that seems really, really good until you look at the fact that the rocket could take a small payload with it, but nothing big enough to hold the weight of a man and a dog and a life support system.
Yeah, they maybe could have put a small dog in there.
Maybe, but there was no way that they could have done it. And, oh, wait, it turns out the whole thing was a fraud.
Yeah.
there was an artist, God, I can't remember what kind of art exhibit she called it, but her name is Joan Fontcuberta, and she made this art exhibit, and she faked all kinds of documentation that from the outside looks believable. So, of course, the press ran with it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Until you actually started reading it and you knew what you were talking about, and then you discovered that it was utter and complete garbage.
Yeah,
It was full of holes. It was wrong.
And what year was that she did her thing?
1969.
Yeah, there was actually some falsification going on before then, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one of the guy and his dog going to space and missing, that's totally bogus.
Well, that's good. I would have felt bad for the dog.
And finally, the
There.
last thing I want to talk about is the actual theories.
Yeah.
Because we have gone through all of the history, we should finally talk about the theories, which are very easy.
It's either yes or no. It's just kind of a binary thing here.
Totally,
Yeah.
it's a binary theory section. Okay, so our theories are yes, it's real, and as we've talked about, was some weird stuff with the Soviet space program and how they scrub people out of the history books, and it's entirely possible that there are people who we don't know about because whoever was supposed to remove them did such a good job that they scrubbed them out of everything, and we just don't know.
Yeah.
And they could be as simple as, having died in a simple training accident.
Sure. And,
But we won't know.
Or got drunk and fought someone.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see where there'd be, because rockets were kind of unreliable in those days, and frankly, they still are kind of sometimes. I mean, they're more reliable than they used to be, but
But they still go wonky.
yeah, so you think they want to keep the whole thing secret, and then
Well, I think in the
cover up their mistakes.
late 50s, early 60s, they had a 50% success rate.
Well, something like that.
Yeah, so, that wasn't exactly a job that I would want. Well, flip a coin. You're going to live or you're going to die.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that every day.
Well, think about. When you think about the like Apollo 11, the first moon mission. Mm-hmm. Okay, you can die on the launch, or you can and flew out of orbit and
Bounced off the atmosphere.
The other one, you bounce off the atmosphere and into space. Well, it is possible to bounce off the atmosphere, but unless the atmosphere just gives you a massive boost, you're not going to fly up into space. You're just going to go into a different orbit, and eventually probably go back into the atmosphere and either burn up or maybe just
Or safely land somewhere.
Make it to ground. Yeah.
Yeah.
So